Welcome to the Crypto Counsel at Wiley, where we decode the most important issues in crypto litigation and regulation. I'm Frank, a finance and technology litigator who focuses on crypto law. My other co-hosts, Lauren and Isaac, are off doing exciting things in the world of crypto, but I have two very special guests here in their place. With me, Nick Carden, Associate General Counsel with Coinbase, and my colleague Michael Toner, the chair of Wiley's Election Law and Government Ethics Practice. Nick, Michael, welcome to the Crypto Counsel podcast.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate you having me.
Great to be here, Frank.
Thank you, guys. So I think it is a little bit of an understatement to say that the political atmosphere around crypto has been a bit of a roller coaster the last few years. And I know both of you have had a seat at the very front or back or whichever part of the roller coaster is the most sort of incredibly insane. You've had a seat in that part of it for a good chunk of it. So why don't we begin just by you telling our listeners just a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and how you guys came to work together on some of these crypto policy, political advocacy type issues.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not great at introductions, to be completely honest, and certainly not great at talking about myself. But my role at Coinbase is to support our policy team, our marketing team, and our growth product teams. I do that on a global basis, and I have wonderful teammates that support me and all of our internal clients to achieve their goals. And certainly today we're going to be focusing on our policy team and some of the work that Coinbase has done and just the industry and the connection to politics and the recent years and changes that we've seen.
And I think Nick is being very modest. He's been at the center of so many fascinating policy and electoral debates over the last couple of years. It's been a pleasure for our firm to represent Coinbase and work with Nick and his colleagues over the last couple of years, and also stand with Crypto Alliance. We're going to be talking a little bit about that during this podcast, an advocacy organization that was created about 18 months ago and was very active in the 2024 elections. But it's just been a pleasure to work with Nick and his colleagues. It's 1,000 miles an hour in the crypto world, and it's been great to try to keep up.
And I know that Nick is being modest because before we started recording, he was telling me that tomorrow he's going to the Grand Prix in Miami, and they don't just let anyone go to the Grand Prix in Miami. So clearly he's, a high flyer. But you guys obviously have been doing a ton of work, and I want to talk here about that. But let's just set the stage for what you came to be doing by talking first about the prior administration, the Biden administration, and the way that that administration approached crypto. And the one way people have sort of summed up that was regulation by enforcement. That was a phrase that got thrown around a lot. It was the focus point of a bunch of lawsuits about why that was a bad thing. And many people, Coinbase especially, and other big players in the crypto world obviously pushed back hard on that. Nick, I'd love to just hear from your perspective as someone at Coinbase. What did regulation by enforcement, when people use that, what did that mean to you? What were you guys experiencing from that administration? How would you characterize that? Because obviously lawyers, it means something, but it was all over the place. And I'm just curious from the Coinbase side of things, what did it mean to you all?
Yeah, and we'll have to do a part two on this with Ryan Van Grack, our head of litigation, who can speak more in depth on what we experienced. But at a high level, we were sued by the SEC for being an unregistered exchange, selling securities. And that is problematic for a lot of different reasons, namely because we didn't have the obligation to register, and that's not what the law says. So we felt like the Biden administration was using the SEC as a proxy for just general anti-crypto position and rhetoric. So it was a stark contrast from 2021 when we had our direct public listing, direct public offering, and the SEC, of course, had to approve that. And then just a couple of years later, we are now being sued by that same agency. Very strange.
So there's a couple key moments in the prior administration's regulation by enforcement approach that I think maybe are worth talking about. And the first one I'll start with was sort of could have gone either way. And I'm curious what your experience was, but there was an executive order by President Biden in March of 2022. It was executive order number 14067. And it had an interesting title. It said, Ensuring Responsible Development of Digital Assets. I mean, that doesn't sound so bad. But from the Coinbase perspective, how did you all sort of process and experience this executive order?
I think you said it really well. It's not so bad, but it wasn't the movement or the progress that we expected. Certainly, it felt a little too late. It certainly was a first step towards clarity, but it wasn't exactly the definitive or clear directive to establish regulatory guidance and clarity that Coinbase and the whole industry has been advocating for. And so I think it was a good start, but it wasn't the start that the industry was hoping for.
What's funny is I think that I've heard that from a lot of clients, and folks that have even come on the podcast would agree with your characterization. I printed it out. It's 10 pages, single space printed out, almost 5,500 words. And yet I think many people would agree with you that it did not add up to much of clarity, progress, structure, all the things that you would want for a stable operating environment for any enterprise, especially one like crypto, where the rules of the road are very uncertain and needed to be developed with more clarity for things to drive forward. So there's, the next, I think, thing maybe worth mentioning was the IRS DeFi broker rule. And this was a much longer document, like incredibly so. And it was called a midnight rulemaking by a lot of folks in the industry because it was rolled out in a proposed form in the summer of 2023. But like a couple days before January 1st of this most recent year, when the lame duck session of the Biden administration, they just said, okay, here you go, it's final, and left everyone to sort of react accordingly. So, can you just tell us a little bit about the DeFi broker rule and what it would have done had it actually gone into effect, which it didn't, and we'll talk about why in a little bit.
Yeah, thankfully it didn't, I think, from an industry perspective, not just a Coinbase perspective. So this sought to classify DeFi platforms as brokers. And what that means is these entities or these platforms would have the same tax reporting requirements as traditional financial firms. So this is collecting personal information, reporting that personal information and other transactions to the IRS, and then issuing 1099s to their users. And I think there was some reasonable basis for folks who are in favor of this rule to reduce the deficit by a significant amount of money. And that's certainly a valid basis for this rule. But I think the industry was really concerned about further stifling innovation, which had really been the case over the Biden administration's 4 years in office. And the risk is you fall far behind to all these other countries that were really fostering innovation in this industry. And I don't think we wanted that. I don't think the industry wanted that. So, and I think practically speaking as well, there's going to be a ton of paperwork for taxpayers and for the IRS. I don't think the IRS was fully equipped and ready for the onslaught of paperwork of what this rule could have meant.
And I imagine Coinbase, in your role with a ton of customers that obviously would be affected by this rule, and Coinbase directly, that paperwork burden would fall in large part on you guys, not to mention just the individual taxpayer preparing their return.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, just a huge burden on these platforms.
So Operation Choke Point 2.0, maybe the next place to go on the Biden administration. And the fact that it's 2.0 and there was a 1.0, I think is a little bit crazy, but you want to just tell us about what this was. I mean, it wasn't an official policy as such, but it certainly was something that people in the industry came to understand as an initiative by the Biden administration.
Yeah, and really 1.0 started by the Obama administration and effectively spearheaded by bank regulators that certain industries were or are unsavory. And so what they would do is they would publish informal guidance and they would exert pressure on banks that had customers in these industries. They would do that. They would exert that pressure through very sort of their secretive or at least confidential examination process. And then the Biden administration sort of stepped in and continued that and just determined that the digital asset industry, crypto, was one of these unsavory industries. And I think you really saw this manifest itself with the debanking of crypto banks, or at least banks that offered banking services to crypto platforms, crypto-related companies. So you had Signature Bank that was put into receivership while it was solvent, which I think is a fairly unprecedented move. And then you had Silvergate, which had a very non-public cap on its deposits, on its crypto deposits of only 15%. And this sort of permeated across other crypto-friendly banks as they saw a rise in regulatory actions. And then we even had denials by the OCC of national trust bank charters after they had conditionally approved the charters and then, sort of ultimately in the end decided not to approve those charters. So really a coordinated effort, but sort of a non-public effort.
And then maybe before we move to the election and sort of how we exited out of this administration regulation by enforcement situation, SAB 121, I don't know if that was another thing on your radar during the prior administration.
Yeah, Coinbase is a pretty vocal opponent of SAB 121. It required SEC reporting companies like Coinbase, and there are a handful of others that were impacted by this, to record crypto assets held in custody for its customer as a liability on its balance sheets, which is really counterintuitive to what we do as a custodian. We do not own our customers' assets. We custody them on their behalf, but we don't own them. So it's counterintuitive to think that we would have to have that as a liability on our balance sheet.
So suffice it to say, obviously, the prior administration, not the greatest situation for your business and growing and thriving. I guess one solution to that can be political advocacy and making sure that you can elect people who maybe want to do things a little differently. So I know Michael and Nick, you guys sort of got together and figured out some ways to do that.
Yeah, Nick, really interested in your thoughts, and we're going to talk a little bit about 2025, 2026, but sort of a retrospective of 2023 and 2024 when the crypto industry just became so active in terms of policy and issue advocacy, rating candidates and office holders, holding events all across the country, talking about issues that matter to the crypto community. The Stand With Crypto Alliance obviously did a lot of that work. And then sort of red meat electoral advocacy through Fair Shake PAC and independent expenditures, supporting certain candidates, opposing other candidates. What was that like for you, Nick? What were those 2 years like, taking stock of that? Because I have to tell you, I don't think there are many examples of an industry becoming so activated so rapidly and then having the impact it had on the 2024 elections. What was that like for you and the team?
Yeah, you highlighted a bunch of things that are really top of mind, sort of at looking back at the prior election cycle. I think what I'll say is, to start us off here, is the last data point I have is that there are at least 52 million Americans that own crypto. I won't necessarily say that they are a single issue voting block, but I do think there's a significant portion of those folks that materially care about crypto, about their holdings, but about the industry and in the progress in this country. And that is not an insignificant number of folks, even though if we don't have it necessarily an exact number here, we know that the number that we're generally working from. And these folks needed a voice. And there were a lot of industry players, including Coinbase, that felt like an organization like Stand With Crypto was needed and an organization like Fair Shake was needed. So we're certainly proud contributors to Fair Shake and donors to Stand With Crypto. And I think, Michael, you touched on a couple of things that Stand With Crypto did, and those are the really top of mind things for me. The scorecard is a really unique function of Stand With Crypto. It's a first of its kind, and when we talk to the Stand With Crypto advocates, of which there are over 2 million in this country, they cite that scorecard as an educational tool to learn about their candidates that they can vote for, as something to help them make a decision in their process of deciding who to vote for. So I think that is really cool. I think Stand With Crypto did a great job hosting the America Loves Crypto Tour, which is a really neat event across many cities leading up to the election with big names like Chainsmokers and Love and Jesse Murph and really high-end acts and high production value for putting that on, and really galvanized crypto interested, crypto curious, and sort of crypto forward people to really bring this issue to the front of the 2024 presidential election. And I think Fair Shake is, obviously a separate animal and really a beast. It's really become quite the organization. they have a lot of money, and that's the war chest is sort of undeniable. And they're the formidable foe that they are now for politicians who are anti-crypto. I think that's probably Fair Shake's goal, is to make being anti-crypto bad politics. And, that was shown in the Sherrod Brown Ohio Senate seat, where I think across the industry, including Fair Shake, there's $32 million spent in that race. And you saw Bernie Moreno be successful in that and taking that seat. And then even looking back prior to that, you had Katie Porter in the Democratic Senate primary in California. There was $10 million spent in that race, sort of against her, or at least in favor of Adam Schiff. And we saw her congressional career ending at that time, at least for now. So the impact of Fair Shake is hard to deny. And what it was, and I think what we'll talk about here shortly, is what it will be in the future too.
Well, Nick, I think it's just a classic case study of what you need to do to try to change things in Washington. And it's like multidimensional chess. You've got issue advocacy, candidate scorecards, real emphasis on policy, Stand With Crypto Alliance, a natural organization to take the lead on that. And then you've got some hard-hitting political electoral advocacy that a super PAC like Fair Shake can do and did do through independent expenditures and supporting candidates and opposing candidates and having a real impact. But two things, Nick, I'm really interested in that I was struck during our work together during 2023 and 2024. One is that in many ways, these issues were bipartisan in nature. When you look at the supporters of the crypto industry, it wasn't a far-right segment, although certainly conservatives and center-right voters are very active in the crypto industry, but also progressive voters who were kind of baffled as to why this war was being waged on the crypto industry in the first place. So interested in your thoughts on that, because there's not that many policy domains where the right and the left can kind of come together and effectuate change. And then also this idea that a lot of people who hadn't been that active in politics, maybe hadn't voted that often in the past, were activated by the crypto campaign and turned out in numbers that we hadn't seen historically. So your thoughts on those two dimensions?
That is such a good question. I think you're probably right. The majority of folks probably sit somewhere in the middle, but you also have far-right candidates who either are aligned with Trump and, he was a pro-crypto candidate, and you had folks who sort of were or became pro-crypto as a result of being pro-Trump, and maybe they sat on that far-right side. And then more on the sort of the policy side and the advocacy side, you had folks on the far left, as you pointed out, who are maybe questioning, why is this really an issue? And why are Democrats, generally speaking, anti-crypto? Which has always kind of baffled me personally, because I think as you think about crypto, it democratizes the financial system. It, in theory, creates economic freedom. And one of the major data points, which I don't have the exact data here, but we talk about how people are unbanked. And a lot of those people are lower income, come from a variety of different demographics. And as a result, that those are typically the constituents of the Democratic Party. And you would think that could be a point for Democrats to latch onto and sort of make a case for being pro-crypto. And then I think everyone else is probably somewhere in the middle of this really being a nonpartisan issue. And it's hard to see how it could be on the far left or far right. So, that's what I would say about sort of the spectrum of crypto and in politics.
Well, it shows, Nick, how broad-based the crypto coalition became during these last couple of years. And I know we're going to talk in a few minutes about what may lie ahead in 2025 and 2026. But, politics sometimes brings together strange bedfellows. It was wonderful to go to the inaugural crypto ball in Washington, and there's Snoop Dogg playing for over an hour, which was tremendous. Wouldn't have imagined 2 years ago that Snoop Dogg would be in the trenches for some of our key client work, but there he was, and has been so supportive of the crypto movement.
You're right. I think we shouldn't sleep on Snoop Dogg as a brand at all, given his collaboration with Martha Stewart. Maybe we need to bring Martha into the fold of crypto as well.
Without the insider trading, though. Just the pure, we can keep that out of the mix.
Yeah, exactly. Which, to be quite honest, crypto has a sort of a terrible reputation for insider trading. And that's something that, Coinbase works to dispel and has a lot of safeguards to prevent that. We're not a token issuer, and I think you see those issues happening with token issuers. But yeah, I think, Michael, your point is spot on that crypto is for everyone. And if Snoop Dogg can be there and maybe one day Martha, I think there's a lot of hope for this industry.
I'm curious because I'm not as engaged as Michael and probably you, Nick, on the dynamics of the political side of it. But when the crypto block started to form, it did strike me that it was bipartisan, nonpartisan, however you want to describe it. Were you surprised at how long it took for a candidate for the Democratic Party for president Biden, I'm not sure what promises were ever made, but even Harris, I don't think she said anything until September or October. Did that surprise you guys?
Definitely. Yeah. We want to work with all parties and we want to work with all candidates. That's not just Coinbase, but that's the industry as a whole. And I think there was a lot of effort put towards the Democratic Party to say, guys, this really doesn't have to be a battle you fight. Like, you have other issues that probably will win or lose you votes, and you don't have to make this an issue that will do that. You might lose votes, but you might not necessarily win any votes. And so we certainly hoped for a better outcome and better collaboration, for lack of a better term, with the Democratic Party.
Nick, that was one thing that I thought was impressive in the scorecards, the ratings of the candidates and office holders. There were some Democrats across the country that did very well, that scored very well, and that's terrific. And that was highlighted. There were others that didn't score quite as well. But it shows the potential that's there for this to be a bipartisan effort. And maybe we pivot to the current environment and what we might see over the next year or two.
Yeah,
what do you think?
I think, not to bury the lead, but there is seemingly more bipartisan momentum behind legislation. There's two bills that are out there that are pretty far along, the stablecoin bill and the market structure bill. And just a general, obviously on the regulatory front, things are radically different. And we can talk about that. But just at the top line level, Nick, what are you seeing now that we have a new administration and a new approach? What does that look like for Coinbase?
We have a pro-crypto president. We have a pro-crypto Congress in both the House and the Senate. We've never had more pro-crypto candidates in Congress than this year. That obviously leads to optimism for our industry from a legislative perspective, which, as you highlighted, we're seeing with two stablecoin bills actually pending, and we have a market structure bill as well. So we are excited for what the future will bring, both from this administration and Congress. And I think we could probably talk a little bit more about what we've seen in this administration and just first 100 days, if you want.
So, it wasn't, I think it was the third or fourth day into the Trump administration that we got a new executive order. It replaced the Biden order, and it had a much better title: Strengthening American Leadership in Digital Financial Technology, which feels a lot more optimistic and, the way we want to go. So, that set the tone for a lot of what has followed. It wasn't long after that the DeFi broker rule was repealed by Congress, so that didn't have to be a concern anymore with all the paperwork you were describing. Obviously, we got additional executive orders. There was a Bitcoin reserve that was established. And then there were things at the regulator level, DOJ, SEC, other stakeholders coming out and speaking clearly that there was only going to be certain kinds of things they would pursue and not others, but there was going to be clear rules of the road, and it wasn't going to be the muddle and the regulation by enforcement that we were in before. So certainly a lot of changes there.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of sincere progress. I don't want to discount the fact that, we might all be a little marred by the prior administration. The Trump administration is indeed pro-crypto, and they deserve a lot of credit for that from this industry. They've made a lot of wonderful progress for the entire industry. And as you've seen, Trump himself, or at least his family, is engaged in issuing tokens. They're really all in, setting aside the views on issuing the token. You can sort of give them credit for walking the walk.
So are you and Michael, you guys are just going to happy hour and just the work is done, or does the fight sort of continue and the advocacy continues? What's happening there?
And that's a great question, Frank. And Nick, I know people will be interested in what you see in the issue advocacy landscape over the next year or two, what you see in terms of Stand with Crypto Alliance over the next year or so, and then Fair Shake PAC. What do you think? Do you think there's going to be some notable changes in terms of what those two organizations do, or just a continuation of the very successful activities over the last 2 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think first we'll see a lot more concrete progress from this administration. So I think we will see legislation passed that gives us some regulatory clarity on who the crypto regulator is in this country. I think we've had summits on crypto. We have a crypto czar now. We have a crypto task force. I think in addition to the EO establishing, or at least a directive to establish the strategic Bitcoin reserve, we're going to see that come to fruition. So definitely a lot has happened, great progress, and we're going to see that continue. In terms of Stand With Crypto and Fair Shake, I don't think they're going away. I think they're just growing stronger and getting better as time goes on. And this is only the fuel of seeing their growth over the last 18 months is only motivation and momentum for them to continue that growth. I think specifically for Stand With Crypto, grassroots advocacy, issue advocacy doesn't really go away. Of course, it spikes a little bit in election cycles, but I don't think it goes away. And this is still an issue that matters to a lot of people. They are growing like crazy. I follow them on Twitter and I see all their chapters that they have in different countries different cities or different states. And they're having pizza parties to celebrate Bitcoin Pizza Day. They're in local parades advocating for crypto. It's really an impressive, truly grassroots movement. So I think they're going to continue that. And I think they're going to show up even more on the Hill. They're going to have these founder fly-ins that they did, and they're probably going to increase that frequency of bringing real people across all demographics to Washington, D.C. to say, these are the people that are in crypto. These are real people, and they care about the issues. And they're building some really, really cool things in this country. And then Fair Shake is, Michael, I don't know if you happen to know this off the top of your head, but they are one of the biggest super PACs in the country right now. I don't know how much money they have in their war chest, but it's over $100 million, I believe. So they seem well suited to play in midterm elections. And I think, any incumbent or candidate is wise to understand crypto and have a position on it and then determine whether or not they want to be pro-crypto or anti-crypto, and then sort of understand what the repercussions are of being anti-crypto might mean.
Well, Nick, you make a number of really key points, and you think of Fair Shake with that war chest. We're entering a midterm election where voter engagement, voter turnout is always more difficult in a midterm election as opposed to a presidential election, and that's going to be the mission over the next couple of years, is getting people out to the polls in 2026. It's just harder to do inherently than a presidential election. But one thing, Nick, I'm really interested in your thoughts. With all this success at the federal level, electorally, and also in terms of issue advocacy and rating candidates and office holders, do you forecast, particularly with Stand With Crypto Alliance and other organizations, more of a focus at the state and local level? Particularly, I know we have a few wayward attorney generals who like to file suits that are really out in left field, but do you see more of a focus at the state and local level in terms of the advocacy than in the prior 2 years?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're going to see that, and we're starting to see it in Oregon after Coinbase was just recently sued by the attorney general there. That posture in certain states is not going to go away. And we're still going to have this residual effect from the Biden administration, from certain parties that are still anti-crypto. And that is okay. Coinbase is ready and prepared to fight on behalf of itself and the industry and its customers. I mean, ultimately, and I won't go into the merits of all these pieces of litigation, but we are advocating for, via this litigation, what we think is in the best interest of our customers, what our customers tell us that they want. And so these services that we want to provide in these states, we're going to fight for that. And I think the industry will do the same. As hopefully it's not a continuation of the prior 4 years, but if it is in certain state and local areas, we're going to be ready and willing to defend ourselves.
At that state level, I'm curious, obviously there's things like attorneys general who are trying to step into the absence of SEC enforcement and say, there's blue sky laws that they can enforce. And so it's not over in their state. But there's also at the state level a lot of advocacy by the industry to encourage local mining, local business generation, not just at the sort of holding the asset, but actually, mining the asset and the ecosystem around that. Are you guys at all plugged into and a part of that, or is that sort of a separate little ecosystem of advocacy that's happening by different industry participants?
I think It is adjacent to what we advocate for, but I think that is mostly separate because Coinbase is an exchange. We don't engage in mining necessarily. So you're probably right. It's on the local level. And we are familiar with certain organizations that are 501c4s or other PACs that are advocating for that piece of the larger crypto ecosystem industry.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are we going to, I think we are strengthening American leadership in digital financial technology, but do you think we are on a path where the U.S. will be the leader in this space?
Oh, gosh. I hope so. There's a report published every couple of years by Electric Capital, and they track crypto developer jobs or blockchain developer jobs. And we saw this outflow of jobs from the United States year over year for the past 4 or 5 years. And what we obviously want to reverse that trend. So, as much as we talk about an industry and kind of some of its stereotypical benefits or hindrances, this is a job creating sector. This is a new industry. We don't always have new industries come up where a country can be the center of that innovation in that industry. I mean, we see it with AI, and certainly I think our policymakers agree that we want the United States to be a leader in AI. And I think we need to see that same tone with crypto. We should want the United States to be a leader in crypto, and frankly, all innovation with AI and crypto leading that definition.
Nick, particularly when these jobs are well-paying jobs in middle America that really matter to communities across the country. And what is your sense, Nick, in terms of the strongest international competitors in the crypto space? Is it China? Is it India? Is it the EU? What are the focal points there?
It's definitely the EU. One of the really interesting things about this industry is it is generally decentralized. I mean, that's sort of the nature of blockchain technology. And that allows for this to sort of pop up really wherever you are. And you don't necessarily have to have that same concentration of talent in Silicon Valley or in New York or some other part of either our country or another country. It's not necessarily concentrated in London, which is a major financial services hub for international markets. You're seeing these jobs pop up in what we'll call smaller European markets in the Czech Republic, I'm blanking on a couple of other countries where there are concentrations of these folks that are really interested in this technology and are really excellent at what they do. So we don't want to limit ourselves, certainly, to having those jobs go international. We can try to keep them here.
And Nick, do you see a similar phenomenon here in the United States where it's not just Silicon Valley, it's not just Austin, Texas, it's not just Manhattan. There are other parts of the country where crypto's thriving?
It really is. Coinbase is a remote first company, and I'll sort of speak on behalf of Coinbase, but I think Kraken is remote. I'm thinking of other sort of US based exchanges, but Kraken is remote. I think Ripple is remote. Gemini is also remote. I personally live in Augusta, Georgia, and I'm probably the only person in crypto here. And so there might not be a concentration of talent, but it allows for the decentralization of talent across the United States. And, without going into the talent recruiting argument, it allows for companies to really prioritize their talent and regardless of where they live. And I think that benefits the company, it benefits the industry.
I mean, I could say that, obviously our firm, Michael, and our firm Wiley is here in Washington, D.C. It's our only office. And the concentration of crypto companies here in Washington, D.C. is truly impressive. And I think indicative of the fact that folks understand that technology companies being closer to the centers of where policy and all of these things are happening is important, that you have to have some sort of local presence. But I mean, it could happen essentially anywhere, to your point, Michael. But I am truly somewhat surprised by the degree to which Washington, D.C. is sort of a hub for crypto, in addition to some of the more, Silicon Valley type places.
I'm surprised. I didn't know that myself. That's interesting. I think D.C. is gaining in sort of being a tech hub generally, but you're saying there's a crypto hub as well.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely here and growing for sure.
Are you seeing that a lot in Northern Virginia, sort of the Tysons corridor, or is it more in Montgomery County? Or
yeah, I mean, all throughout the DMV.
DMV, right.
Right. It's really pretty interesting.
Was the precipice of that Amazon coming and establishing their Northern Virginia headquarters, or do you think there was already that concentration? And maybe it's because of all the sort of the government contract industry also being, can be tech forward.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I don't know if it traces to the Amazon headquarters over in Virginia or not, but I will ask.
Yeah.
Try to figure it out. Well, what do you say, Michael? Do we have anything more for Nick here about the...
I think this has been terrific. We clearly have to get Nick to agree to come back for another podcast in the months ahead, particularly as we see the 2025-2026 political season unfold. It's going to be a fascinating next couple of years, but I think it's been terrific.
Yeah, I really appreciate the conversation, Nick. The podcast room is always open to you, and we appreciate your insights, and obviously the work that you guys are doing is truly incredible and pretty groundbreaking. It sounds like, sort of developing a playbook basically from scratch for this industry to mobilize and activate voters. It's really impressive. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. It really does feel like we're going 0 to 1 on this, and it's in no small part to the Wiley team. So we're very grateful for all the work Michael and the team does for us.
Well, Nick, it's great to have you with us today. Great to work with you each and every day and your colleagues, and looking forward to what the next 18 months to 2 years hold. Time's flying by. You get to be as old as I am. That's what happens. Nick, you're much, much younger, and Frank, you are as well. But it's wonderful, Nick, to be in such an innovative environment and doing things on a really major scale. It's very rewarding. So thank you.
We can only hope the next time we speak, Snoop Dogg has a role in the administration.
That'd be great. Talk about a perfect bizarre candidate.
Exactly.
I think Snoop Dogg would be perfect for that.
I'll get Martha on the line too. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick. We will send you on our way. You can enjoy your pimento cheese sandwiches there in Augusta, and appreciate the conversation.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.